Most candidates who have successfully completed Part 1, Units 1 to 3 of their teaching certificate will wish to go on to Part 2. Between Parts 1 and 2, they have to do teaching practice over a period of at least a year. The class they teach may be their own, or they may negotiate to teach another teacher's class in whole or in part from time to time. At the end, the Unit 4 candidate compiles a record of teaching practice. All candidates have an experienced teacher as mentor. This can be someone they invite themselves, or if they don't know anyone or have no other teachers nearby, they can ask for suggestions from their local or nearest branch or from the RSCDS office. Some candidates, even in areas where Scottish country dancing is very active, have difficulty finding a mentor, possibly because teachers are not clear about what the task entails or what the time commitment is likely to be. The first part of this presentation directs to documents which give advice and information on the task of mentoring. The second part covers what the mentor does or can at least offer to do. Some teachers may feel reluctant to act as a mentor if their own teaching certificate predates the current unit system, but there is plenty of information available to bring them up to date, and in the essentials, the skill of teaching Scottish country dancing has not changed. Documentation on the RSCDS website for Unit 4 and the task of mentoring was substantially revised in late 2022. It is to be hoped that everything will be updated on the website by early 2023, but check that documents mentioned in the presentation as having been revised are the 2022 versions. Information is to be found under the Learn tab. The main route is via the subsection Teacher Training. In addition, a few of the same documents can be found, again via the Learn tab, but in the Teaching SCD section, subsection Mentoring. In a little more detail, accessing documents via this route gives the following information. This document contains information about all 5 units, and a teacher considering becoming a mentor would be well advised to familiarise themselves with the complete unit system. This document is very informative about the mentor's task and is therefore an excellent starting point. Various forms are needed at the end of the teaching practice, but it is useful for both mentor and candidate to be familiar with them from the start. This one should be essential reading for a candidate from the beginning of their teaching practice, so that they are thoroughly aware of the requirements. This should ensure that at the end of teaching practice, the record of teaching practice conforms to the syllabus requirements. This one must be sent with the record of teaching practice, and the candidate indicates where and when they intend to present themselves for Unit 5. The mentor completes this one at the end of the teaching practice. The application form for Unit 5 has a revised layout. It should be submitted to the office when the candidate has decided when and where they intend to sit Unit 5. Part of the mentor's role is to ensure that the candidate knows the requirements of the record of teaching practice so that they do not have to resubmit it. There is no set format for the document, though it does have to conform to certain parameters, of which more later. Where the full document must cover 6 hours of teaching, the samples contain shorter lesson planning sections while making the other sections clear. The samples are only suggestions and are in no way prescriptive. Whatever format a candidate chooses is perfectly acceptable, so long as the document includes the required information for all the prescribed sections. As well as looking at the syllabus requirements, this section mainly considers how a mentor can be involved over the duration of teaching practice. Since the written record of teaching practice is what is assessed, an important part of the mentor's task is to ensure that it is compiled correctly and that the candidate avoids having to resubmit it. Finally, there are some thoughts on the possible use of video, which is not currently part of the process. To be able to give advice to a candidate undertaking Unit 4, a mentor has to know what is required of them. In the syllabus, information on Unit 4 starts on page 8. In brief, the Unit 4 candidate has to do the following. Candidates compile a 1-page summary of all these classes to be included in the record of teaching practice. This forms the basis of the detailed review section of the record of teaching practice. Some teachers may think that because they haven't taught a branch class, they aren't eligible to be a mentor. This is not the case. There is no necessity for the mentor to have taught an RSCDS run class. The important thing is for them to have taught regularly for some time. A mentor may advise more than one candidate. The phrase, where possible at least twice, suggests that more than 2 visits can be made to the candidate's class if considered necessary. However, where possible could also imply that a situation may exist where a mentor can't see their candidate teach in person. In such a situation, thought must be given as to how a mentor can judge the candidate's capabilities. Even if the mentor can visit classes, they will always see a selection of lesson plans and self-evaluations, and if they can't visit, it might be wise to see more. While nothing can be as effective as a mentor seeing their candidates' lessons in person, there are other possibilities. The use of video in such situations is considered later. A mentor is not there to teach or train the candidate, so must consider how to get their message of good practice across to them and encourage them to think about their teaching and how to develop it. The mentor's role is not to criticise negatively, but to find ways to encourage the candidate to be self-critical and think of ways to move forward. What is particularly valuable is the opportunity that the candidate has to tap into the experience and accumulated wisdom of an experienced teacher, challenges as well as successes. Other than visiting classes, there are several situations where a mentor could have input. This depends on whether the candidate wants that input and whether the mentor has the time and the inclination. Potential mentors should consider how much input would be ideal and when it could become too much. In addition, as mentors study the documentation on the website, it should become clear to them that there are certain things that they should not do. These should really all be common sense, but it is worth mentioning them as a reminder. In summary, they should not do any of the following. There will be more information about giving feedback later. Even though a mentor, especially in the early stages of the collaboration, may be tempted to interrupt a lesson if the candidate is in difficulty, it would be unwise to do so. A discussion after the class is the place to address any issues. It would seem sensible for a candidate to be clear from the start about what components the record of teaching practice should contain. Appendix G of the syllabus gives good guidance on what is required in each component, as do the sample records of teaching practice. In addition, mentors should make clear to their candidates which dances can be included in the record of teaching practice. While non-RS-CDS dances may be taught, the dances included in the record of teaching practice must be from the books listed in Appendix G. A scene setting so that the examiner understands the nature of the classes being taught. This evolves from the candidate's lesson plans for the 6 written-up hours of teaching. This shows that the candidate has thought about their choice of music, or that they have communicated with their musician if they have one. A very important part of the review, where the candidate can show how they feel they have developed over their period of teaching practice, what their next steps might be, their aims, and so on. Any preparatory time before teaching practice begins might consider topics such as these. Ensure that if the candidate is not working with their own class, they understand that the class they will be teaching may be used to a particular teaching method or working from a pre-arranged programme. They will have to read the class well so that they can judge how much they can vary from what the class is used to. It must always be remembered that all a mentor can do is say that they are willing to look at lesson plans. It has to be at the candidate's request, since the mentor cannot oblige the candidate to ask for assistance. It can only be hoped that they will recognise the value of doing this. It is up to the mentor and the candidate to decide how to go about this, but it is worth considering that if a mentor does allow their mentor to see their lesson plan, at least in the early stages, this should be the version prepared before teaching the class. After the class, the candidate should add their self-evaluation for the various stages of the lesson, and this could again be discussed with their mentor. Once the candidate is secure in their style of lesson plan, it would be adequate to see it after the lesson, with the post-lesson self-evaluation added. As with the sample records of teaching practice, this is only a suggestion and is not prescriptive, but whatever style a candidate adopts, they would be advised to conform to certain requirements. It is likely that candidates will need some guidance on dance analysis in particular, and how to use it to guide the development of their lesson plans. The candidate's ability to be self-critical, to think about their own strengths and weaknesses, to consider how their teaching could evolve, must be demonstrated in the self-evaluation section of their detailed review, so should also be focused on as they develop their lesson plans. The starting point for discussions during teaching practice will be the mentor's visits to the candidate's class, if it is possible to arrange these. If this is not possible, then start with the candidate's lesson plans and encourage them to review the lessons after the classes. After either the visit or having sight of the lesson plan and lesson review, have a discussion with the candidate. A mentor has to think about how to guide a candidate in this. A mentor could encourage their candidate to think about their self-evaluation under these or similar headings. This one is a good start to get a first impression of the candidate's mood after the class. Even when a candidate has given the impression that they think the lesson didn't go all that well, try to encourage them to focus on something that did go well and why. Questions such as these help the candidate realise what they need to focus on next time. It's important that the candidate shows that it isn't sufficient just to reach for the nearest CD or whatever form of music they are using. If they have a musician, they have to think about their interaction with them and how best to use them. These are good starting questions to get the candidate started on their self-evaluation. Currently, there is no suggestion that the mentor must or even should give written feedback on lessons. There is, however, nothing to say that they can't indicate to their candidate that they are willing to provide it, if the candidate requests it. At any future visit, both can see whether points raised in discussion have been addressed. And the mentor is, after all, taking on this task voluntarily. Even if there is no written follow-up, the pattern suggested is valid guidance for verbal feedback and discussion. Styles of feedback evolve, but a fairly standard basic format is a sort of sandwich. Starting with the positives, then it is important in this section not to use negative language, but it can be a challenge to find positive terminology. Complete the sandwich with something upbeat. This document is not currently on the website, but contact the office. At the end of their teaching practice, candidates compile their record of teaching practice. Candidates should be considering its content as they proceed through their teaching practice. Do ensure that the candidate is aware of this deadline. Document X405, Guidelines for Preparation of Record of Teaching Practice, has been revised. The submission must comprise two components. It is worth encouraging candidates to compile this list, at least roughly, from the beginning of your association. If the mentor is not involved from the beginning of the candidate's teaching practice, they should be advised to refer back to the beginning when compiling this page. This information helps the examiner evaluate the appropriateness of the candidate's teaching. Ideally, classes would have at least two sets, but it is appreciated that this may not be possible in certain areas. For the Unit 5, it is likely that at least 18 dancers will be assembled for the examination. Ensure that candidates conform to these requirements. They are a means of establishing consistency among candidates and avoid the examiner having to deal with a variety of styles. If a candidate's first language is not English, they may submit their record of teaching practice in their own language, but must have it translated and enclose the translation with their submission. The 3 documents which are submitted along with the record have also been revised. Although there is no pass-fail result for Unit 4, some submissions are returned to candidates before they reach an examiner because they have not been formulated correctly or are missing some components. If mentor and candidate are well informed about the requirements, all the boxes in the checklist have been ticked, and the candidate allows their mentor to see the record of teaching practice before submission, this shouldn't happen. It is standard practice to complete a cover sheet and declaration that a submission is a candidate's own work when submitting a piece of written work for assessment. There are slightly different instructions depending on whether Unit 5 is being done at summer school or other residential course, or at a local course over a number of sessions. When the candidate has completed the record of teaching practice and signed their cover sheet, the mentor completes Form X411, stating that appropriate consultation has taken place. The candidate sends it to the office with their submission. It would be advisable for the candidate to allow the mentor to do this so that there is no need for resubmission. Resubmission of the record of teaching practice because of its content is rarely necessary. However, if for any reason resubmission is required, the candidate can proceed to the Unit 5 examination, but will not be awarded their teaching certificate until Unit 4 has been completed successfully. As a final point, it is worth considering the possible use of video during teaching practice. It is used in the Core Training for Instructors scheme, CTI, and for Unit 4, it could potentially give access to a mentor for a candidate who does not have a suitably qualified or willing teacher within travelling distance. Document CTI 30, Guidelines for Use of Video, is a useful resource. Of course, the use of video has its advantages and its disadvantages. Candidates may not be aware of any quirks or habits they may have, or, for example, may not have a good awareness of their positioning within the room when teaching, or their voice level. And if both candidate and mentor can see a recording of the lesson, the points can be made quickly and clearly. If they feel something didn't go well and can't understand why, they can look at their performance and can probably see the reason when they have an outside perspective. They can see things which may have been happening elsewhere in the room and which they did not notice at the time, and they can think about how such a situation could be dealt with in the future. The whole class, if numbers allow. It must be recognised that not all candidates, will be in a position to teach a class of that size. The recording equipment should not focus solely on the candidate. It is important for the mentor to gain a picture of how the candidate interacts with the class, how the class behaves, whether they are attentive, whether they can correctly interpret what the candidate wants them to do, whether they are chatty, whether there is someone who dominates the group. These are the kinds of topic which would then be addressed in feedback, either oral or written. During the development of the core training for instructors scheme, it was realised that video would be an essential part of the process. Since the CTI trainer's final lesson is always recorded, a consent form was developed. This is signed by all the participants in the class. The same thing could also be done in a situation where a mentor cannot visit their candidate. Privacy laws will vary from country to country, and action appropriate to the location should be taken. A basic level of recording can be done quite easily with a phone or laptop. While the quality may not be as good as that required for the CTI, it should be adequate, especially if the mentor has the lesson plan to hand. It may be all that is available to a candidate who is preparing Unit 4 in isolation, with no one to help with recording. If a lesson is recorded in short segments, this can make the transfer process easier. Short snippets can be sent by Messenger or WhatsApp, longer sections via Google Drive or WeTransfer, or other similar methods. Document CTI 31, Instructions for Sharing Video, available on the website, may be useful, though the methods used in Unit 4 can be less formal than those required for the CTI.